Hurricane season is most known for its winds, but it's the tidal flooding and storm surge that brings the most death and devastation. Hey everyone, I'm meteorologist Joe Martucci, one quarter of the Across the Sky podcast team at the Lee Enterprises Weather Network. A couple of months ago, I had the opportunity to go on the Behind the Headlines podcast, our sister podcast here at Lee Enterprises, hosted by Terry Barr, to talk about a series of stories that I did last year focusing on tidal flooding in different aspects of Atlantic City here on the Jersey Shore. Not all tidal flooding is created equal. Yes, we do have that major storm surge and tidal flooding from hurricanes, but something as simple as 5 inches of water just due to an onshore wind on a sunny day can bring impacts to the restaurant industry, education, and transportation in the Atlantic City area. And it's not just at the Jersey Shore. Places from Florida to Texas to Louisiana all share in these stories. They all share in the trials and tragedies that coastal flooding can bring and the opportunities that arise as well. Tune on in as Terry Barr and I talk about coastal flooding at the Jersey Shore and beyond.
Flooding is the most common natural disaster in the United States, according to Homeland Security statistics. But in Atlantic City, tidal flooding is becoming a regular problem, and some schools end up being inaccessible and thus closed due to the high water. Hello, I'm Chris Lay, the podcast operations manager for Lee Enterprises. And in this episode of Behind the Headlines, our host Terry Barr is talking with Joe Martucci, a meteorologist with the Press of Atlantic City in Pleasantville, New Jersey. Joe recently collaborated with Climate Central to dig into its data for a series of reports focused on the rise in tidal flooding. His work led him to talk with city leaders and lawmakers about how they were looking to fix the issue before it's too late. Here's Terry Barr going Behind the Headlines with Joe Martucci.
Thanks, Chris, for that great introduction. And yes, Joe Martucci, meteorologist with the Press of Atlantic City, is here with me. I'm your host, Terry Barr. Really important issue that Joe has been following in the Atlantic City area. Joe, I want to ask you right away, you started looking into the idea and the issue of flooding and how it's actually impacting schools and businesses, even transportation in the area. What do you think surprised you as you were finding out more about this?
Yeah, and thanks Terry for the introduction. I really appreciate it. It's a great first question. I think and I might not answer the question directly, but I'm gonna answer this in a way that, from my personal experience, the thing that surprises me the most is how much people just live with the coastal flooding in Atlantic City. Now, that's nothing new to me working at the Press of Atlantic City, but before I was at the Press of Atlantic City, I knew about coastal flooding. I know, in the weather world, you get your coastal flood advisories, your coastal flood warnings, but to see how often it happens in Atlantic City, to see exactly how wide of an impact it has, but also at the same time, how people are just kind of just living with it or okay with it, I think surprised me the most. And we're trying to dig into this with this series that we've been doing, and hopefully we're changing some people's minds about, hey, it doesn't have to be like this, or hey, it is going to get, somewhat worse, and this is what maybe we can do to solve it.
Wow. I mean, this is not to say a deep issue, but I mean, with the flooding, it's a little bit scary too, I would think. You call it coastal or tidal flooding.
Yeah.
What is that? How is that different from, what we would see as regular flooding?
Yeah, another great question. So tidal flooding is saltwater flooding caused by some combination of the winds and the moon phase and storms nearby. Now, for anyone who's listening that lives, away from a coastline, you're thinking of your flooding from rain. Sometimes you get a lot of rain and it backs up sewers and drainage systems, or your river flooding. The thing that I like to tell people all the time about coastal flooding is that rain has really nothing to do with this. It could be a sunny day with an onshore wind and a strong onshore wind, and you're around the full moon, bam, you have your coastal flooding. So it's different, and coastal flooding is salt water intrusion. It's not good for your car. It corrodes your car if you're going to drive through it a lot, and you don't want to go through it. So I've seen people. I've actually had to help get people stuck or unstuck from water in Atlantic City before. So that is the difference. And, if you go to our website, pressofAC.com/weather, you type in the search, you type in coastal flooding ingredients, you'll see an explainer video that I have on it.
Yeah, I think everybody
just
should
a little
do
plug.
That. Yeah, that was very good. When I was reading these articles, and I love how you kind of divided these into schools, businesses, transportation. I was so surprised to read about the schools that 7 of 11 Atlantic City public schools flood once a year.
Yeah.
What happens? How do people deal with this?
Yeah, it's, again, this goes back to the surprising part, right? People are just kind of okay with this. So, I really, just to dive into this data, we worked with Climate Central. They're a nonprofit group that deals with talking about, climate change and doing research. And they have a heavy focus on working with people like me who are in journalism on this. So, and they're based in New Jersey. I don't know if I said that before, but anyway, that helps because, they're familiar with us. I'm familiar with the area. I've been to their office. So anyway, when it comes to this, what can happen sometimes if it's really bad is you get a delayed opening or early closing. If it's that bad, a lot of times what's happening is that, the water's getting into the parking lots. And now, some people might still choose to park there. It's not like we're talking about 7 feet of water, but it's still enough to be a nuisance. And that's the key to this whole series. We're not talking so much about the Superstorm Sandys and your large, powerful nor'easters. We're talking about your nuisance flooding that might happen 24 times a year. So it's something, people, whether it's, buses taking alternate routes or, we've talked to people who send their kids, with a pair of boots and a pair of sneakers because they have to change when they get to school. It's those kind of, again, nuisance things that in a number of towns, they don't deal with it, or they might be, meaning they're saying, hey, we don't want to deal with this, so we're going to do this.
Right.
In Atlantic City, there have been steps to do this, but there are always better efforts. And there are some towns along the Jersey Shore that do, a good job of mitigating against this.
So the residents there obviously know how to deal with this, and it's part of life, I guess, is how you're making it sound. But when you are doing these reports, what kind of reaction are you getting from your readers? And if you're out talking to people?
The reaction from readers has been, generally sharing their own stories. Hey, I read that you were writing about this. Hey, I had something similar. When it comes to the sea level rise and the projections outward, there's a segment of people who question the validity of the data that comes through and say, flooding's never been, I've never seen it been any worse over time. And there's a number of different ways to answer that question. So, I'll be very brief and I'll answer it in 2 different ways here. Sometimes what I'll tell people is, well, you might not be seeing as much flooding because your town is doing more about it, right? So, and that might not always be true in Atlantic City. Sometimes it is, but that's also something. In Atlantic City, I will say one thing that they did is they opened up, it's called the Baltic Avenue Canal. It was built in the early 1900s to reduce flooding. It closed for a number of years, like I'm talking decades, and then it opened back up 3 years ago. That has helped. So you're going to see less coastal flooding as a result.
That's
the
fascinating.
Second thing, and this dives into the larger, climate change isn't a religion. You don't believe in it or not. There are facts and what you choose to do about it or where your beliefs come in. So there needs to be a separation of the data and the forecast and what is chosen to be done about it. And I think that's important because you can say, yes, I understand that, there's and I'm not going to get the exact number right, but, there's a 83% chance and I know 83 for a fact because we use that from a Rutgers report. But anyway, 83% chance that sea levels are going to rise 3 feet by 2100. But you could say either, we're going to deal with it later, or it's just going to have to be a part of life and people are going to have to leave the city or the shore. That's your belief. That's not for me to tell you. My job in these stories is to tell you the stories of the people who are going through it now and, what some ideas on the table are or what has been done about it.
And for me, I love the coasts, but not living on the coast. Some of what we're talking about sounds a little frightening to me. When you say in some time that it could rise by 3 feet, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. I'm going to try to pull up this number as I'm chatting with you here,
Okay.
just so I have it right. But it's interesting that you say that. And Terry, I don't know exactly where you lived or where you haven't lived. Have you ever lived by an ocean before? I know you're in Wisconsin now.
No, all of my travels have basically led me throughout the Midwest and down to the South.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
and I asked that not in a way to put you down, but I say that in a way because in New Jersey, the Jersey Shore is very valuable.
Oh, yes.
Extremely valuable. Homes regularly go for $1 million plus. Some towns homes regularly go for 3 million plus. We have decided as a society that the benefits of the shore, the fun, the beach, the sand, has outweighed the downfalls that come with this. And I have this number for you now. There's an 83% chance, and I said 3 feet, 83% chance that we're going to rise up 2.3 feet by 2100. So what do you do about it? And that, again, that's what we're trying to explore. I'm not Joe Martucci, is not telling you what to do about it, but we are talking to people politicians, just people who have lived around for a while, just to see what their thoughts are on it.
Yeah. Okay. So about the schools.
Yeah.
Lots of old schools, obviously. And if they're being impacted
Yeah.
by flooding constantly, that's got to be some issues to the structure and the solidness of the schools. And I'm even thinking, you said parking lots. I'm thinking then the sports fields are being flooded.
Mm-hmm.
What are they talking about? You can't necessarily go and build a whole bunch of new schools, but do they have any answers or ideas to try to help these old buildings last?
Yeah, one of the things we wrote about in our education piece was that U.S. Representative Donald Norcross said was introducing a bill that would provide $130 billion for schools targeted at those most in need. Atlantic City would be included on that. That bill stalled, but in the Build Back Better Act, it included $82 billion for repairing and modernizing public school infrastructure. So you would think that some of that is going there. You're right. There are schools that, have been around for 100 years and, they're not going to rebuild them. Atlantic City, that you would have to get all kinds of permits and, all that government stuff to make it happen, but it's things like, is it raising roads in certain areas? Is it, trying to build bigger storm barriers? One of the things that the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection has in their plans, and it's not a definite that's going to come to fruition, but if it did, was they would build kind of a large barrier across one of the main thoroughfares between the shore and the mainland, along a back bay. So a bay that's on the western side. So you have the ocean to the east, it's on the western side of the city. That would help to mitigate coastal flooding. So, you're right. I mean, you can't just raise a school. It's a little different than raising a house, but there are things that are being done on the local, state, federal level that could mitigate coastal flooding in Atlantic City in the decades to come. And don't get me wrong, it's not like the city hasn't done anything. There have been things. There's a seawall that's on one side of town here. There's plans, and it's going to happen. One of the roads that goes into Atlantic City, one of the major roads, Route 40, is going to get raised. Those are all good things, but more is going to have to be done if you feel like this is an issue that needs to be addressed.
And that's the interesting thing, isn't it?
It always is.
Wow. Okay. So what is next as far as your coverage as a meteorologist? What are you trying to do next on this story?
Yeah. So, we're going to continue our partnership with Climate Central. I should say, our series did win a New Jersey Press Association award for best specialty writing.
Well deserved, Joe.
Thank you. It's not just me. It's Buzz Keogh, who's our executive editor. It's Gail Wilson, our presentation editor, Climate Central. But we're going to focus on seniors. That is going to be our next project. We already have some data in the works. We're looking at where seniors are most concentrated in Atlantic City and plotting projections of floods over them. Now, this one, we may actually I think we're going to take a slightly different route. We're going to look more at the big storms rather than your nuisance flooding, but that's what's next in this series.
Okay. And if anybody who's listening wants to read your stories, and again, you've already done 3 different parts, where again can they go to find these stories?
Yeah, so you can go to pressofac.com. You can go follow me on social media. You can go to my linktree, linktr.com/Joe Mart, MARTWX. So linktree.com/Joe Mart WX. If I could, Terry, I just want to plug one more thing in. We have a lead weather team now. We have meteorologists in Richmond, Tulsa, one covering the Midwest, including your area, and me in Atlantic City. We just got top of the line, state of the art weather graphic system. This is extremely, extremely great news. So we're doing forecasts, we're doing explainer videos. All of that can be found at any of our sites. In our case, it's pressofac.com/weather.
That is great. And I think we are realizing, being faced with these kinds of things, just how important weather information is for all of us. When you're watching, the South get hit by tornadoes, it seems day after day. We haven't had a lot of snow in the Midwest, which is odd. And then talking to you about flooding, there's just so much that we can all learn by paying attention to these things.
Absolutely. If you want snow, come to the shore, because we were crushing it with snow this winter.
Yes. I was watching a lot of that and thinking, oh my goodness.
It was our year. It was our year for snow. I loved it. It was a great winter. Looking forward to some warmer days. Once it gets past like March 15th, I'm ready for 70s. I can put winter. I like winter. I'm done with it on March 15th.
Good for you. And I'm right there with you too. So
awesome.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise. And wow, this has been a terrific discussion. And you've revealed a lot more than even what we were able to read in the articles. So thanks so much for that, Joe.
No, thank you, Terry. Thanks for having me on. And thanks to everybody for listening. Really appreciate it.
Great. And again, Joe Martucci, he's a meteorologist with the Press of Atlantic City. And I'm Terry Barr. Thank you for listening.
As you heard, Joe is uncovering new ways to share this important story and plans to continue asking about solutions to combat the flooding. We will include links to his articles from the Press of Atlantic City in the show notes. If you appreciate what we are doing with this program, we encourage you to invest in local journalism and support the Press of Atlantic City, or whichever newspaper it is that serves your community. I'm Chris Lay, and for Terry Barr and myself, thank you so much for listening to Behind the Headlines from Lee Enterprises.
Thanks again to Terry for having me on here and chatting about coastal flooding and how it impacts different areas of Atlantic City. And like I said at the top, it's not just an Atlantic City issue. It's not just a Jersey Shore issue. It's something we see across America. Whether you're going on vacation to the beach or you live in a different part of the United States next to the shoreline, we've all seen an increase in coastal flooding. Between 1950 to 2015, we've seen increases in the number of flood events per year. Take, for example, Washington, D.C. In the 1950s and 60s, D.C. saw on average 6 tidal flooding events per year. Last decade, it was in the low 30s. Go over to Key West, Florida. Coastal flooding barely happened once a year on average in the 50s and 60s. Now it happens on average 7 times a year, and this is also true on the West Coast as well. San Francisco saw 4 coastal flooding events per year in the 1950s and 60s. This past decade, it was in the low teens. All these numbers come from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. So it's a nationwide issue, and it's caused by a variety of factors, both due to natural factors, the way we build our shores, as well as greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. In fact, here in New Jersey, most of our tidal flooding is due to natural factors. But regardless, seas are rising, coastal flooding has increased, and we continue to look for ways to do something about it. The Federal Emergency Management Association, for one, they offer discounts on flood insurance to towns that take proactive measures to mitigate coastal flooding. Hope everyone enjoyed this special episode of the Across the Sky podcast. Sean Sublett in Richmond, Kirsten Lang in Tulsa, and Matt Hollander in the Midwest. We'll be back with you next week to talk about the wide world of weather. Take care.